the same function. It grabs that colorless precursor molecule and makes melanin out of it. And so if both of these genes show incomplete dominance, we can get even more phenotypes as far as skin color is concerned. If you've got 4 of the dominant alleles, you have 4 copies of that enzyme making dark pigment. If you have none of the dominant alleles, you have no copies making dark pigment. If you have 1 of the dominant alleles, you'll have a little bit there, 2 of the dominant alleles, a little more, and a little more still. So it just comes down to how many of the dominant alleles you have. And maybe I should use this guy as an example right here. He has 2 of the dominant alleles. Would his skin color be different if he was big A, little b, little b? The answer is no, because he would still have 2 of the dominant alleles. It doesn't matter if he's this or big A, or big B, or little a, big B. With continuous variation, it just comes down, it's the dosage effect. It just comes down to how many of the dominant allele that you have.
Are these genotypes like the 32 major extreme and vascular genes and vascular, are those like all standardized for human beings? So like for every, say for Mexicans, for example, is the curly dominant and the straight recessive?
As far as I know, yes, but it's probably a sense. So these are real genes inside human beings, but there's probably some other genes that affect the trait also. Like there might be some other proteins that modify how tightly the curls are. All right, so yeah, so this is true, but there might be some modifications to it, is what I'm saying. All right. This is what I was looking for there. So when you see this type of thing, and it's a continuous variation with incompletely dominant traits, it just comes down to how many of the dominant alleles you have. It doesn't matter if you got them in the A gene or the B gene. All right, and as it turns out, they think even that's a simplification. They think there's probably a C gene also, which also makes melanin, also shows incomplete dominance. And so when you drag that one into the picture, you get at least 7 different phenotypes, which are listed here, and some example genotypes. Like here, if you have 3 of the dominant alleles, like big A, little b, big C, you're going to be medium. But again, notice there's different ways you could get that. You could be little a, little b, or big B, big C, or you could be big A, big B, little c. Again, just comes down to how many of the dominant alleles you have. And that's why we have sort of a bell curve distribution of skin colors. Okay, here's a thought question for you. If there was a couple and they were both, let's say, medium skin color. Let's say they were both like this. And they're going to have some kids. Is it possible for them to have a very dark kid? Or very, very dark kid? Yeah, it is possible. Who's good at math? What's the chance of them having a very, very dark kid? Can anybody do that in their head? Not 1 in 8. Well, remember that you can approach all the probabilities individually. What's the chance that they'll get a big A kid? 1 out of 4, right? 1 out of 64 is the correct answer to the overall problem. But what I'm saying is, yeah, let's break it down a piece at a time. The chance that their kid will get big A is 1 out of 4. If you do the Punnett square, there's a 1 out of 4 chance that a big A little a crossed with a big A little a will give you a big A kid. And the same thing with the B's. The chance of a big B little b and a big B little b having a kid who's big B is 1 out of 4. And the same argument with the C's. And so when you multiply all those independent probabilities together, if I do the math right, it's 1 out of 64. So two medium-skinned people who are having, if they're both like this, there's a 1 out of 64 chance they'll have a very, very dark baby. Or the flip side of it is they have a 1 out of 64 chance of having a very, very light baby. But there's many different ways they can have a more medium baby. There's just a lot more combinations that will give you 3 of the dominant alleles and 3 of the recessive alleles, a lot more than 1 out of 64 combinations. So it's more likely that they'll have a medium-skinned child. And they think human stature, human tallness, also is a continuous trait, meaning there's more than one gene that contributes to how tall you are, and each of the genes exhibits incomplete dominance. So again, you get kind of a bell curve distribution, just because there's more probabilities of getting somewhere in the middle of the curve, of getting some dominant alleles and some recessive, than getting all the dominants or getting all the recessives. Those are kind of unlikely combinations. So most people are towards the middle of the bell curve. Okay, now, in your handout, is there anything about epistasis? There is. Okay, so I'm going to skip that and skip linked genes. I should have edited this out of a computer thing, so give me a second to fast forward through it. Go back. Okay, here we go. The part I'm on now says autosomes and sex chromosomes. All right, so here is what's called a karyotype on the digital projector there. A karyotype just means looking at someone's chromosomes under a microscope. And, you know, it should match up with more or less what I've been telling you, that we are diploid creatures, so we have 2 of every chromosome. Like you can see the homologous pair of chromosome number 1's there, and there's the homologous pair of chromosome number 2's. You get 1 from mom and 1 from dad, and here's your homologous pair of chromosome 3's, 1 from mom, 1 from dad. So you have 2 of every chromosome, and each one's a homologous pair. And that's, go ahead.
Is that using an electron microscope?
I believe it is. They used to do this before they had electron microscopes, so it can be done with a light microscope, but somehow it looks like an electron microscope to me. I agree. Anyway, so you have 23 homologous pairs of chromosomes. If you're a female, but if you're a male, the situation is slightly different. This is considered your 23rd pair of chromosomes. And for females, that chromosome 23 is called the X chromosome. Now, don't mix that concept up with a duplicated chromosome, which sort of looks like an X. All chromosomes can have that X shape when they're duplicated, but that's just the name of this particular chromosome. I don't know why they chose it, but they call it the X chromosome. Anyway, for females, their 23rd homologous pair is a pair of X chromosomes. But for males, it's slightly different. In males, their 23rd pair is not a homologous pair. It's still considered their 23rd pair, but males have only 1 of the X chromosomes, and its non-homologous pair mate, so to speak, is a smaller chromosome called the Y chromosome. And again, don't let the name throw you. It's not as if that Y chromosome was shaped like a Y. It's not, it's just a regular old chromosome. But they call it the Y chromosome for some reason. And the reason why it's so small is it carries very few genes. Remember, most chromosomes carry hundreds and hundreds of genes, or in some cases thousands. but this little Y chromosome only has a few, and the genes it does carry are for something very specific. Those genes confer maleness on an embryo, on a fetus. In other words, any developing fetus that has a Y chromosome will have genes for developing into a male baby, whereas on the X chromosome are some genes for developing into a female baby. Which chromosomes you have for this 23rd pair determine whether you're going to be born as a boy or as a girl. And so all women have 2 of the X chromosomes. They're XX, and all males have 1 X and 1 Y. Males have XY. And so they call any chromosomes that are not exactly the same between men and women sex chromosomes. And any chromosomes that are the same between men and women are called autosomes. So looking at this diagram again, with human beings, the first 22 pairs of chromosomes are autosomes. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl. You have 2 22s and 2 21s and 2 1s and 2 2s. Those are autosomes. But the 23rd pair are your sex chromosomes, because those aren't exactly the same, depending if you're a boy or a girl, or a male or a female, I should say. All right, and so embryo or a fetus that has 2 of the X chromosomes develops into a female, and one that has the X and the Y develops into a male. As I said, because there are genes on here that control male development and control female development. Now, remember that when you make your gametes, when you are making your sperm or your eggs, each pair of chromosomes separate into different eggs and different sperms. And so when the female makes her eggs, those eggs always get an X chromosome, because that's what her 23rd pair is, 2 X chromosomes. But with the males, it's slightly different. When the males make their sperm, half the sperm are going to get the X chromosome, and half the sperm are going to get the Y chromosome. And so what the sex of the baby is determined by which of those male sperm arrive at the egg. Half the babies are going to be born female if the sperm with the X fertilizes the egg, and half the babies are going to be born male if the sperm carrying the Y chromosome fertilizes the egg. So you sometimes hear that males determine the sex of the offspring, which is not to say that we can do it deliberately. So, we're going to make a boy baby tonight. I mean, not willfully, but it just comes down to which of his sperm fertilizes the egg. Remember, the Y chromosome is smaller, and so sperm carrying the Y chromosome are ever so slightly lighter than sperm carrying the X chromosome, and so they swim slightly faster, and so a slightly smaller number of males are born because of that. And I forgot what the exact percentage is, but it's very slight. It's like 50.1% males versus 49.9% females are born. But there is a slight statistical difference. But kind of interestingly, males tend to do more stupid stuff throughout their life, and so we tend to die off more. And so even though more males are born, by the time you get to middle age in your senior years, there are more females alive. Someone said if you're a guy and you want to be popular with the girls, live until you're 70 or 80, because all the other guys have died off by that point. You are a catch, those senior ladies. Yes?
Is it also true that boy, like embryos, even babies, are more fragile than females?
I had not heard that. You mean they're more likely to die in utero than females?
They're just in general more fragile. I heard that.
I don't know. I had not heard it. I don't know one way or the other. Okay. Well, let me think. That's probably a good enough stopping point. So bring this to lab today. I'm going to continue with this lecture at the start of the laboratory.